Hello everybody, my name is Dan, I'm joined here by Fem and Faithy, and welcome to No Deplete Master Your Keystone. We're now going to move into, controversially, my favourite dungeon, The Other Side. A lot of people don't understand why I like this dungeon, and trust me, I don't understand why I like it either. You know what, Fem, do you want to start us off on the very first pull, because it can be a bit tricky sometimes?
Yeah, depending on the affixes, I think this pull varies in success. But there are three types of mobs: the cultist, the bone soldiers, and the big boy, the warlord. And the warlord is usually the biggest problem because he hits hard and he gets angry at your tank and he slaps your tank.
Yeah.
And that guy it's soothable. You should soothe if you have a soothe. Hunters, druids, rogues, unless it's Dabadan. And then they
don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah, there's the bone soldiers, which just melee. Basically, they do a frontal troll guard that actually knocks you. So don't stand near the edge of the platform if you're gonna get hit by it.
You've never died to that before, right?
No.
No.
I would never die to such a mistake. And then there's the most deadly mobs in this pack are the cultists. They're not very deadly to the tank. They just do they don't melee, by the way. So if you get aggro on these, don't run away in fear. They don't melee you. They just cast the scribe, which is interruptible, and also it doesn't do that much damage. But their most deadly ability is the Dark Lotus, also interruptible. Should interrupt if you can. But it's the flowers on the ground, the little half moon-ish kind of thing that explodes after a while. If you can point it out,
yeah,
perfect. That thing goes on the ground. It always goes near a player, so you will have to move a lot during these pulls. But as I said, it's interruptible, and if you don't interrupt it, move away from it. It does one-shot you, even one-shots me as a tank on hierarchies, so don't stand in it.
Luckily, it is quite well telegraphed, so it is fairly easy to move out of, but when you're considering that with the warlords, obviously you have the Ravage or the little placed mini blade storms that they do. When you're trying to avoid both of those at the same time, it can get a little bit hectic, and I can imagine it would be fairly overwhelming. Especially if you haven't done these dungeons very much. But moving on to the next pack, it's a little bit more of the same, really. There's not that much extra in this pack. The Raptors themselves, you can see that Fem has a disease debuff, which is applied by the Raptors and stacked up pretty quickly, and it does hurt quite a bit. I'll wind it back just to point out the Death Speaker as well. It's probably the main mob of this pack. And do the Shadowcore casts hit hard at all, Fem?
No, not really. But it is nice when people interrupt it. Once it gets bolstered or on higher fortified keys, it does start chunking you. But in this key, for example, on me and my undergeared warrior, it does about 10% of my health.
Okay.
So it's just nice to have it interrupted. But it's not a necessity.
It does also have a Death's Embrace cast, which is just a buff onto a random mob that it's close by to. It'll basically just empower the mob. It's just extra damage, more or less. It's not a huge deal considering that it can be purged, dispelled, or even spell stolen by a mage. So you probably know.
It's a haste buff.
Okay,
so it's actually good for your.
It's actually insanely good for mage. So if you do have a mage in the group, or if you are the mage, then you probably do want to look to take that one. It's not absolutely vital to need kicking. You probably should focus on kicking the shadow cores more than anything else.
Yeah.
But again, there's no major issue in that pack. It's just all the Death Speaker. Make sure you can deal with that one properly. Moving on to this pack just below the stairs. The pack itself, 4 Raptors, so again, the disease debuff ramping up pretty quickly. Plus 1 Bone Soldier with the Troll Guard. An interesting thing about the Troll Guard is that it's not a targeted ability as such. It is actually a frontal, but it's a frontal in a really short range. So as a melee, you can be stood in front of the mob and take the Troll Guard, but it doesn't do damage to you, which is something that I found. I don't know if it does damage to you as the tank, Fem, but yeah, so if you're not the soldier's target, you won't take damage from it at all. It just won't hurt you at all. So it'll still give you a knockback. So if you're very unlucky, you can be knocked off the side. But, it's something to watch out for just in case, but probably not that worth worrying about too much. Something to point out while we were fighting that pack, you saw us do the group here do quite a neat little skip past the Enraged Spirit. There's a reason why they're skipping the Enraged Spirit here. It is just it's for the sake of pride. It's just a way to get a much smoother pride. What will happen is the small pack of 4 Raptors and Bone Soldier down here, plus these 2 Warlords is enough to trigger the pride, I believe. Is that right, Fem?
Yeah.
And from there, what they would look to do normally is they would look to then come back up the stairs and play this Enraged Spirit with the pride on the urn that's just off the side of the screen here. But that's not quite how it works out, so we'll just continue moving this forward just a touch. What you'll see Fem do here in particular while he's pulling this pack of 5, he does pull it away from the stairs just to make sure that he doesn't accidentally pull the Enraged Spirit from this side, which is perfectly successful. They avoid it entirely. Its pathing range is not too deep. It'll probably come up to give or take around here on the screen. It's not it doesn't come that far. So as long as you're stood in the middle, then it's probably perfectly fine.
You can actually see it stopping there. So.
Yeah, exactly. You see it just stop, have a look at what's going on, realize it doesn't want any of Prop Fem or Necro Uwu, the well-feared protection warrior. And the group just moves on to the 2 Risen Warlords. Again, the same mob as the big mob at the very beginning of the dungeon. Hits the tank pretty hard, the Enrage. It's all good stuff. We've discussed that one already. So again, just more of the same on this one. Just quickly killing off this pack here, and we have the pride. Would you say that it's absolutely vital to take this kind of a route, Fem, in terms of the pride, or would you say that there is probably some kind of would you say that there's a form of iteration that you could do on it? Like, could you play the Enraged Spirit earlier perhaps and then use the pride for something different?
You could, but like this pride has either you kill the spirit that we skipped, and you'll get the pride after the 5 small ones, and then you use the pride to kill the 2 warlords, or you do what we did: skip the spirit, kill the 2 warlords, get the pride, and then we intend to kill the spirit with the pride. That's not what's gonna happen, but the reason you do this route is to get a 40% pride on Hakkar, and specifically on fortified keys or weeks. You can lose the first pull of the dungeon, and by the time you come to Hakkar and kill the pride, it will be 11 minutes into the key, and you can lose Hakkar again. That is why you do this route.
Yeah.
Because if you go straight to Hakkar, you will get pride midway through that hallway, and you will not have pride for Hakkar, and Hakkar is the most overtuned boss in the game, even after nerfs. So you do really want pride for Hakkar.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny to see just how early pathing decisions can make big impacts later on in the dungeon. It's when you are looking at making a route, if you want to look at starting to make routes, you can't just think each 20% in stages. You have to try and think how each 20% is going to affect, or each pride spawn is going to affect the rest of the dungeon. It's this seasonal affix is honestly pretty good. I'm really enjoying it, not just for what it is, but just what it's done to potential pathing as well. About having to think quite a few steps ahead while actually making the routes. And no, it is really enjoyable. I really hope there's something similar coming in 9.1. Honestly, it's such a good seasonal affix as it is right now. But so as you can see on the screen right now, action is indeed coming. That Enraged Spirit from the other side, it gets aggroed by the Fire Elemental, and luckily the Pride itself is basically dead, but this has forced the group to now play the Enraged Spirit early. Faithy, do you want to quickly take us through the Enraged Spirit and its mechanics there?
So the Enraged Spirit is actually one of the more what's called scary mobs in the other side. It has 2 main mechanics, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is quite scary. You have the mask, which are the one displayed on the screen right now, which spawn all around the spirit. And what you'll have to do is, preferably, You just stand with the spirit and you throw a stun or another kind of CC that is not an interrupt. You stun, fear, disorientate, etc., etc., and it will stop the cast, and the masks will disappear. The second ability that the spirit has is the Rage, which is a very, very big AoE dealing ability, which basically just does an immense amount of damage, even on a 15 on your entire group. As you can see, the Rage being cast, and their HP are chunking quite significantly, and the priest pretty much almost dying. So the point about the spirits is that you would like to kill them before the second Rage, because if the second Rage go off, you won't have a defensive necessarily, and that could be very, very scary for your group. And that's why, as you can see here, they mentioned the ninja pulled that the spirit there, so we're now skipping the spirit so we can play it later. And they'll play that on the urn, so you'll have more time to deal with it. As the one that they just killed, they killed with the pride buff, which made it super easy and quick to kill. Yeah, that's basically the mechanics, right? 2 mechanics on that.
Exactly. It's not a lot of mechanics, but the mechanics themselves, less so the masks, they're quite easy to deal with, but the Rage, as Faithy mentioned, very dangerous in particular. You certainly don't want to get a second one off, and even the first one, it's very, very difficult to play through. You certainly need to be looking at using plenty of defensives on that one. But now we come up to the Hakkar corridor. Again, the reason why that Enraged Spirit was skipped, as Faithy mentioned before, they were initially going to play that on the way back, but since they already played the Enraged Spirit from the other side, same mob, same amount of mob count, same amount of percentage, they can just skip it on the way back. It effectively counts as that Enraged Spirit that they've just skipped past that they would have normally played. But coming into the Hakkar corridors, so immediately we have 2 different types of mobs here. The Priest is mostly inconsequential. It has a smite cast which is only directed at the tank. It really doesn't hit that hard, but it will spam cast it, and every so often it will try to heal a close by low health mob. The heal itself does maybe 20% of the mob's HP at a push. I don't think it's too much more than that. If absolutely needed, you can let it go through, and the reason why I say if absolutely needed, there is a mob later on that we will come to, which I will let Fem talk about in just a moment, the Hexer, which does need a lot of kicks and is very important to keep kicked, as it is quite a particularly deadly mob. But before we get to that, we also have the Devoted, and these only feature twice in the dungeon. The Devoted, they don't do anything at all apart from have a cast called Devoted Sacrifice that you see on the screen right now. If that cast completes, they become, I believe, Sons of Hakkar, which have a cast which then starts doing group-wide damage, which no longer hits very hard. It used to do a lot. It doesn't do so much anymore, but I think, I do believe the Sons of Hakkar also have slightly more HP than the Devoted mobs, so they are a little bit more annoying to take down. Also, once they die, they drop a massive pool on the floor, and that's just really annoying to play around in not the most narrow of corridors, but it will easily go from wall to wall across the floor, which is, if you're able to not play them, you don't play them. How do you not play them? The Devoted Sacrifice, while it can't be kicked, it can be stunned. Stunned, feared, incapacitated, disoriented, you name it, you can do it. Just make sure that the mobs stay stunned until they die. You'll see Fem in just a moment. I believe he will press his Shockwave ability. Oh, there's the cap totem. Wait for it. Come on, Fem, don't let me down.
On the first one.
Did you do it on the first one? I'm sure you didn't.
Oh,
there it is. There it is. Yeah. Thank you, Fem. You didn't let me down. There's the Shockwave ability. Perfect. So, yeah, as you can see, there was a Shockwave and a Dragon's Breath at the same time. Again, once the CC wears off, they immediately start trying to recast it. Cap Totem goes down, stuns it again, and on that very last one, Fem's on the ball with the big fear. So that's that pack dealt with perfectly fine. If you do have a melee in your group that does have some kind of CC, they can usually take care of a priest on their own. As long as they're only kicking the heal, the smites can go through. They don't hit the tank very hard. So, they can solo kick the heal. I do believe that they can't actually solo kick the heal, but if they have a CC like Hodge or Stormbolt or something like that, then they can obviously just extend the amount of time and get their kick back. They do have very little amounts of HP as well, so they'll die pretty quick. But the reason why that's important for solo kicking is the next mob that we move on to, which is the Hexer. And you know what, Fem, you can take us through both of these mobs here, the Hexer and the Deathwalker, once the Hexer comes in on the side of the screen there.
Yeah, so we have the priest again, which Dan has explained. We got the Deathwalker, which will do two things. They will Blade Storm, as well as do a nasty bleed on the tank. Something to note if you play with trees or cardboard assassin, things like that. If you use those, the Deathwalkers will put their bleed on the closest target rather than the trees, because you can't go on trees. So be careful as a melee whenever there's trees tanking the Deathwalkers. But yeah, the main mob here, it's going to be present in the next 3 packs, is the Hexer. It is basically, one Hexer is basically like a pack of mobs. That's how dangerous it hits super hard on the tank, like with melees. It has 3 different casts, one of which is a Hex, which will go on one of your friends unless you kick it. It also does a healing wave. Once it reaches 30% HP, it will start casting healing wave. Or if something else reaches 30% HP, it will also start casting healing wave on that. And that heal is actually super important, and you should always make sure that you save a kick for it, because it's a full heal rather than the priest just heals for like 20%. The Hexer full heals a mob. I actually think it's going to go off in one of these packs, if I remember correctly. And also it has the big damage lightning discharge, which is basically a chain lightning. It targets one player, that player gets a circle around them. If you get hit by yourself, it doesn't really do much damage, but it bounces and increases damage with each bounce. So if you stand next to someone, at 2 bounces, I think it almost one-shots. So, and something important to note is that it does bounce off of pets. So if you're a demo warlock, for example, you'll pretty much die if this goes through, because it bounces off of your imp army and then back to you, and you die. So and mirror images are the same on mage. Things like that is something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
But basically, just kick it. Is the play. But always make sure you save a kick for a healing wave. That's the most important part of this.
Certainly, that's why it's certainly less important to kick the priests. You know, that they are mostly inconsequential. Heals can go through, and depending on what it heals, obviously it can be a bit of a problem. If it's healing about 20% of the Hexer's HP, then that is going to suck a little bit, because it is a very, very high HP mob. But it's still not as bad as if a healing wave went through from the Hexer, full healing any mob. You know, it's a very, very big health difference. So I've got it paused here just to point out our very first urn of the dungeon, which is the other side's Covenant-related ability. So the urns, they can be activated by any member of the Night Fae Covenant, and when clicked on, they have a very short interaction time, after which it will explode in a radius, which is indicated by a blue ring around the urn itself. Any mobs inside of that ring will then be stunned for 10 seconds. I cannot remember if they take more damage in this stun. I don't believe they do. It is just a stun so that they can't basically do anything at all, as you will see in just a moment. So we'll just move on with this one. You see the Hexer being taken down, and let's quickly forward. And so the normal play with this pack at the end of the corridor here, you now have one mob of almost each type in this corridor apart from a Devoted. There's 2 Deathwalkers, a Priest, and a Hexer. You can see that the urn has been activated. You can see that by the little stun duration timer that firms go on the screen just above the mob's nameplate. And as you can see from here, they literally just do nothing. They just become fodder for 10 seconds. You do have to pull this pack back if you want to be able to use this urn on them. It won't reach the very end of the corridor itself. But absolutely worth using. This is probably the only pack that it's worth using on in this whole corridor. Normally, the Hexers are immune to CC. They're certainly immune to any CC by any player, but they can be CC'd, as you saw just before, by the urns themselves. Urns OP, basically, is the moral of that story. So once this pack's gone down, again, with the pathing in general, you now see that we have the Pride right before Hakkar. And Prides we've been through, all good. We know how those work. But before we move on to Hakkar, Fem, do you want to quickly explain some of the abilities of Hakkar just before we get into the room? Because there are quite a few.
Well, the most important thing with Hakkar is the blood barrier. Every now and then, I think it's every 25 seconds, Hakkar casts blood barrier, which is an absorb shield, and the amount of the absorb is based on how much damage any other unit than Hakkar takes. That includes the Sons of Hakkar that are present in the boss fight, and your whole party. So basically, if you take 10,000 damage, then the shield will get X amount of absorb, and it also goes on the Sons of Hakkar. The Sons of Hakkar spawn every 20% of Hakkar's health, so 80, 60, 40, and 20. That is why this fight is generally harder the longer it goes on, because if Hakkar sits on low health, he will just get blood barrier after blood barrier before you are able to break the next one. He will already cast the next one, because the blood barrier goes on cooldown when he uses it, not when you break it. That would be a good way of fixing the fight, Blizzard. But yeah, he also has a tank buster ability called Piercing Barb, which is a physical as well as a magic big hit. You can see me reflecting the magic part of it and checking if reflect does damage. It does not. Then when each time the Sons of Hakkar die, they drop a pool, and when that pool is fully absorbed back into the Son of Hakkar, they respawn at full health. That's why this fight is so difficult. And while the blood barrier or blood barrage is going on, you can see the little red swirlies. You can see it on the left of the party frames. Those spawn under people. And then there's the corrupted blood, which is a debuff on 2 people. That is basically, that's the circle around people. If you step into the circle, as the damage ticks from it, it will spread. So that's why you generally want to stay spread at least a bit, so you can react to the circles. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So you can see from the size of the shield at the moment, this is the second blood barrier that Hakkar got off in the fight. But again, as Fem mentioned, because the boss is so low, it's at the threshold where all of the Sons of Hakkar have now spawned. So the blood barrier itself is doing damage to more targets, which means that the barrier is obviously getting stronger. I believe, did you talk about immunities obviously completely negating?
Yeah, as blood barrier is based on the damage you take, if you press an immunity, take no damage, therefore making the shield smaller.
Exactly.
So you should press them on this fight.
There's obviously no need to press them at the very beginning of the fight, because that shield is always going to be really small, as there aren't many Sons of Hakkar, maybe 2 at most, if your DPS is particularly good. Obviously, you can see the group didn't have Bloodlust for this one because it was used on the very first pull, and there wasn't enough time in between pulling all the packs. Even with the miss pull, which just shows how much damage this group had in particular, it was pretty good. But yeah, if you are going to use immunities or even defensives or group-wide defensive damage reduction cooldowns, best used on as late a blood barrier as possible, simply for just being able to make the final part of the fight a bit easier, because I've certainly been in a case where 1 DPS has died on a late blood barrier, and the moment that barrier is broken, the timer for the next one has been there, and it's just basically refreshed the shield. And it's very frustrating, and most likely causes a wipe, as the Sons of Hakkar do pretty lethal damage on this fight as well if they're up for too long. Faithy, is there anything you want to add to this spot? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean,
you can see on the party frames, like to the left of my party frames, I track all the cooldowns, right?
Yeah.
You can see the Shaman has Astral Shift, the Warlock has Unending Resolve, the Mage has Block. Like, all of those should have been pressed on this to reduce the shield size.
Yeah.
But they weren't. But yeah.
Do you know if absorb damage counts into the shield, or does it have to be actual HP damage?
I think it has to be actual HP.
Okay, so your absorbs will be fine to negate some of it as well, just in case. Okay, that's good. Faithy, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's pretty important to mention, you did highlight very quickly, that if you want to kill this boss the easiest way, that is having a lot of damage in the last part of the fight. So as Dan said, having lost, if you're a class with a very, very big offensive cooldown, such as DK, you would like to save that cooldown for later and drop it into the boss when it is lower HP, because the fight becomes harder and harder. And in the start, you have Prideful, so the boss will go low very quickly. So if you drop everything into that Prideful buff, you will suffer the consequences of making a very, very tough and difficult boss. So definitely, if you have very, very long cooldowns, do save them and do use them a little bit later into the fight, as it will make it way, way easier than if the entire group just dropped it into the boss with Prideful.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks. Yeah, as Fem just very nicely pointed out on his on the VOD there, Warrior specifically, Shattering Throw, it does increase damage to absorbs. Again, best used on one of the later shields. I know I do that. Faithy will also do that when he's on his Warrior in this dungeon as well. It's a lot of damage in one global. That's just a nice little Warrior specific thing. But yeah, so that boss is, would you say that's probably the second hardest boss in here behind Dealer, maybe?
I would say it's the hardest boss in the
I would
entire...
say
hardest one?
It's the hardest boss of all bosses and Mythic boss, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is a very difficult boss. It's certainly a big boost. This is why you plan the route around having Pride for Hakkar in particular, and certainly why you look to try and have Lust on that fight as well, just to make the whole thing substantially easier. But now we're coming up to the Enraged Spirit again, which we have already talked about, but we're coming across the urn with it as well. There is a very, very specific timing that you can use to make this a lot easier. It wasn't used in this run, which is unfortunate, but that's absolutely fine. So we know how the urns work. They stun the mobs if they are inside the radius of the urn itself. But what you can do in particular with this mob is the Enraged Masks cast. It gives a buff to the mob itself, and the masks will continue to spawn until the buff wears off. But if you start clicking the urn, which you can see on the very left of the screen here, if you click the urn, the very second that that buff wears off, only one tick of rage will go through, meaning that no one has to use any defensives, your healer doesn't have to worry about doing too much healing, and the mob itself will go down relatively easily. There'll be no major amounts of damage going into the group at that point, but because you have the urn, even if you don't get that timing just right, as long as you're clicking it as the rage cast starts, you'll probably get 2, maybe 3 ticks of the rage off at most, which is certainly well within the realm of being healable without any cooldowns, and that Enraged Spirit in particular is pretty easy. Given that you're normally, or given that in this route that Fem's doing here, you would normally have Prideful for that Enraged Spirit as well, it would have died even faster. But, you know, again, in the case that something gets messed up, then it's good to know how to click that urn at a pretty good timing to make the whole pull a little bit easier. So now we're moving on to the Mechagon area, and Faithy, do you want to take us through up to the gauntlet with the mobs that we're going to see here?
Sure. So first of all, we have the most fun mob in the other side, which is the drill. And what the drill does is that every so often, pretty often actually, it will cast an ability called Haywire. And while Haywire is being channeled, it will deal an immense amount of damage, and you'll have to line it. You have to line aside the ability, or you will die pretty much. Even very big defensives is not going to be enough, even in a 15. You will die. So as it casts Haywire, get behind a corner, or you will die. As you can see, the mage going down, losing his cheat death to stay out for a little bit. So basically, that's all of the mechanics it has. Just get behind the line. And then secondly, we have some of the more nasty mobs, specifically the Hound, which has metallic jaws, which deals a good amount of tank damage. And then the Woof. And the Woof is a targeted ability that will hit one of your DPSs with a stun. And it is an AoE circle, meaning that if anyone else gets hit in the circle, they'll be stunned and take damage as well. And next to the dogs, there is the spinny mobs, which are called Clients. And Clients has 2 abilities, one being an interruptible ability called Discharge, and another one being a Bladestorm. And the Bladestorm ability does a lot of damage. So what you'd want to do is that you'd want to be on the opposite side of the mobs, as they always go backwards, if I remember correctly, when they hit the Bladestorm. So you want to be in front of them, right? And what that Bladestorm does is just does a lot of damage, basically. And they get an Enrage, which makes them do more damage. So get out of that. Don't get hit by that Bladestorm. If necessary, go out of melee. It's very, very scary. You don't want to stand in. It deals very big damage. I do believe you can stun it, though.
You can stun it.
If you have stuns, you can just totally negate the mechanic. If you have AoE stuns, and just stun that.
The Blade
And you
Storm
can just-
itself does damage instantly when the channel begins after the initial cast ends. So as Faithy said, moving out of melee is probably the best chance of surviving that as a melee. It's not vital to be stood right on top of the mobs at that moment. It's far better that you survive, because if you take all three of those, like 4, if you pull it in the way that Fem did just now, if you pull all 4 of those and you take all 4 Blade Storms at once, even one tick, it's more than likely going to kill you. It's certainly going to drop you very low and cause a pretty severe panic moment. You can split that pull up. So as we came into this room, what you'll notice, let me just go for the driller dying. So you can see the driller goes down here. But what you can do is if you play it a little bit, more patient than Fem did here, but he's always on the move, what will happen is the dog, appropriately named 4RF-4RF or ARF, the dog itself will actually move into the middle of the room. That way you can play just the dog and this one headless client if you're not confident in playing all 4 headless clients plus the dog. It is quite a bit of extra damage on the tank specifically, as well as mostly due to the casts that are going onto the tank. They don't do a lot of damage on their own. When there's 4 of them constantly going into you, then it begins to add up pretty quick, as well as the metallic jaws from the dog itself, as has already been explained. But again, if you're not confident, take your time with it. You won't lose out on much. You know, it's far better that you execute a pull successfully than try and pull too much and end up with a full team wipe because just because you were trying to be a bit overzealous. But you know, there's no issue with that here. You can see that everything goes down appropriately quickly. Something to mention about the headless clients, the casts do go on the closest target outside of a certain range. So your tank doesn't have to be right next to the mobs to actually take the casts. But if they start kiting back to try and avoid taking more metallic jaws from the dog, the headless clients themselves will begin to cast discharge on the next closest player within a certain range. I don't know what that range is, but if your tank starts kiting, basically either try and be away from the mobs or have a kick, stun. I believe it's only stuns that work on those headless clients, right? There's nothing else that works.
You can interrupt.
Yeah,
they're
other than
mechanical,
interrupts.
so.
Yeah. So there's no fears that would work on them. There's no disorients or blinds or anything like that. So, it's just a case of just try and have an interrupt or a stun ready for them if your tank has to kite. Otherwise, you know, you as melee are going to start taking the casts, and that really won't end well for anyone involved. Moving a little bit further through the side here, there's not a lot extra to talk about, at least in the very next area. I can't remember if you pull a lubricator with this or not, Fem. I believe you do. Is that correct?
No, we don't.
Not with this one. You did it afterwards, right? And you pulled 2 together. Yeah. That's fine. So this is just the drill again, as has already been explained by Faithy. Again, just the haywire. We know how this works. It doesn't even hit the tank particularly hard, as far as I'm aware. There's no particular tank ability. It's just a scary looking mob with an AoE ability which does hit pretty hard, but we'll just let this one run through before going into the next area. Now, I will pause at a very specific moment in the next area, and I will explain why I do it in a moment once we get to that point. I don't want to skip just because it would be... I don't want to skip too far ahead, basically. We'll just let it move on its own. Perfect. So, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop here and I'm going to point out the mage that just blinked forward, and I'm going to explain why he's done it for those of you that don't know. So, a lot of you have seen this gauntlet area already, I'm sure. If you've done it in any kind of difficulty, this gauntlet area is here with all the slimes. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that has died to the slimes. I'm pretty sure we all have, even amongst the 3 of us, I'm sure. Well, Fem maybe not as a tank, unless someone trolled him, but Faithy, I'm sure you've taken a death or 2 to these ones.
Yeah, definitely.
But the reason why I highlighted the mage here is that if you're not aware of it, there is a button just off to the left of this little entryway here. It's literally just in the corner, immediately to the left of the small tunnel. And that button can be interacted with by anyone who has even level 1 Shadowlands engineering. This is why I believe all 3 of us would highly suggest that if you're going to do M+ as anything serious, pick up engineering. for sure. It is really good between having a invisibility enchant that you can put on your belt on a 2-minute cooldown, even if it can backfire. The ability to be able to press this button is just a nice bonus. They're having a combat res as well in case you're playing in a group that lacks one. Really solid to use. But interacting with that button will cause all of these slimes in this area to stop spawning, and the ones that are already there will just disappear. They will be killed off, and they won't come back for about a minute, maybe more. And it means that you can just run through this whole gauntlet area without any issue whatsoever. There's no risk of death, nothing like that at all. And as you see the mage disappear around the corner, he comes back after clicking the button. You can see all the slimes dying right now. You can see a few of them are dead here. These ones are just about to blow up. And we've now got the next pull. I believe the mage did also accidentally pull the Lubricator. I don't think you did that, Fem, if I'm not mistaken.
It was not me.
Yeah, okay. So probably not the best thing to do. These Lubricators are pretty nasty. We'll go into those in a moment. Really quickly before we do, you have these little bombs here with the Volatile Capacitor cast. They don't melee, they don't do anything, they just explode. You can see the little timer on their heads just here. Once that timer gets to completion, they explode. They probably insta-kill you if you're in that explosion. It's a lot of damage, just don't stand in them. You can see that the mage has rooted them with the Frost Nova, just to be able to handle that without any issue at all. Lubricator mobs. Fem, you want to take us through these ones? They're pretty annoying.
Yeah, they're annoying. They chain cast lubricate. If you don't kick that, you get it does a lot of damage, first of all, but you also get a debuff that it reduces your hit chance, I believe, by 20%, but it might be 50.
It might be 50. I think it's 50.
It's not 50. No, it's not 50.
No? Okay.
Well,
no, it's not.
It reduces your hit chance. And so you want to kick that as much as possible. However, once they reach 50% health, just like the bow breakers in Mist, they trigger their special heal cast self-cleaning cycle, which is it ticks every 1 second. It heals for 10%. So that is the most important one to interrupt. You can live lubricates going through up to like 19 probably. So you can just make sure you have a E-kick for a self-cleaning cycle.
Yeah.
And as I said, it triggers on 50% HP. It can obviously be stunned as well. Just make sure you get the heal. That's the most important part.
And I believe it doesn't recast on stun either, right?
It's if you get it in the cast, it recasts. If you get it in the channel, it does not recast.
Okay, not a problem. Cool. So again, yeah, those lubricators, they can be pretty annoying. Just make sure you kick them, really, as much as possible. Lubricates going through, not deadly, but it's fine. And now we move on to the oils. Did we ever find out what these ones were actually called?
Spare oil, right?
Spare oil.
Yeah, spare oil.
I think that was at least my...
And since these are the one mobs that Faithy knows the name of, Faithy, do you want to tell us about these mobs a bit?
Another fun mob. Nah, they basically just have one cast that they'll spam cast forever. And it's a cast that can actually do quite a lot of damage if you're unlucky and getting focused by multiple of them, which is Essential Oil. So what you'd like to do here is that you want to interrupt, would be calling out who interrupts what preferably, or having one you control yourself. And what you'd like to do is stun them, interrupt them, and just keep them from casting as much as possible, as they can prove to be a very, very deadly mob. Also, using one cooldown or two here is pretty good, as you'd like to get them out of the way ASAP. As you'll have a pride spawning right after, you'll have some time to get your cooldowns back for the next, which, depending on your class, you'd like to offset anyways. So if you're a class with like 3-minute cooldowns, etc., then definitely do feel free to use them right here. That is a good point.
Yeah.
Also, while we watch this pride die, because we know what pride does at this point, remove the X. It is 20%. That's a check mark.
It is 20%. Okay, no, that is a check mark. You're absolutely right. Let's get another check mark for Fem.
No. He said 50% there.
No, he said 20 initially.
20 or
he did say 20 initially.
Okay,
he hedged his bet. If it had been 50, I wouldn't have given it to him. But if it had been 50, I would have given it to me. There you go. You got 3 check marks now, Fem. There you go. Brilliant. You're on a roll, man. Yeah, so again, we know what pride does, so we don't need to talk too much about this. The next area is just this little pipe here. If you're very astute and you are looking at it while fighting the Pride, then you can see when it's just finished and you can just run straight across, but don't take the risk if you're not too sure. As Fem just highlighted there, you can indeed leap over it with things like Heroic Leap or Infernal Strike from a Vengeance Demon Hunter, any kind of ability like that. I believe Grappling Hook would work the same way for Outlaw Rogue, so you can obviously just skip straight through that area without running the risk of being knocked off and looking like a complete clown. So this next boss...
You can also use Door of Shadow.
You can use Door of Shadows as well, that's true. For all you wonderful Venthia players who are probably only really Holy Paladins, and maybe the odd warrior here and there, and possibly a priest. But now this next boss... Probably the easiest boss in the dungeon, I would have thought, purely because there's
also really hard.
But also really hard at the same time. That's going to be a common theme in this dungeon. I think the other side has probably the hardest bosses collectively of any dungeon in the game right now. But I'll take you quickly through this one then. So the boss is split into two different bosses. They are the Mana Storms. You have Milhouse Mana Storm, who you always fight first. I don't believe there's a way to force Millie Mana Storm first. No. If you could, that would be insane, please. But you can't at the moment, so that's not so important. Milhouse Mana Storm has a couple of abilities of his own. You can see him casting one now, which is Summon Power Crystal. The Power Crystal you will see go down on the floor in a moment. It's just a purple crystal that will attempt to channel a beam from itself to Milhouse. You can stand in the way of that beam. If the beam does reach Milhouse, then he starts channeling, or he starts casting or pulsing AoE damage across the entire group. Not that deadly if 1 or 2 ticks go through. If more than that go through, then you're going to be in a bit of trouble. What you can do as a player is you can stand in the beam. It increases the damage that you deal by a percentage per stack, and it does stack pretty quickly. However, it also does damage over time, which also increases with the stacks. So it's a bit of a risk-reward type thing with those. The crystals are spawned pretty aggressively. I think at any one time you can have 2, almost 3 up at the same time. I believe it only ever gets to 2 at once. But something to highlight here is that, and again, any kind of immunity you can force to drop the stacks a little bit earlier. Again, something like a Spell Reflect, if you're stood in it, it will stop you from gaining any more stacks. You will keep interrupting the beam as long as you are in between Milhouse and the crystal, and you'll just stop your stacks from going up any higher. So it's a good way to soft reset your own stacks. There's also a tank ability, which is just a Frostbolt cast. Just set up a kick rotation within the group. Not too much of a big deal. Can also be reflected by a prop warrior, which you may happen to see more of as we go further and closer towards 9.1. And the last ability that I want to talk about, which is the more important one, it is a massive laser beam, which is targeted on 2 players at the same time, which will be indicated by 2 arrows above their head. We'll just keep this moving on, and we'll get to see that in a second.
Something to note as well is that it's cast by Maleficent. And also in the next phase, Milhouse will be the one stunning the other boss.
Yeah, exactly. So while you're fighting one boss, the other boss will continue to perform abilities on you throughout the phase itself. So off screen, which you can't see right now, Maleficent is obviously doing the laser on the 2 players on either side of Milhouse, as well as throwing out a saw blade, which just puts a dot on a random player. It doesn't do too much damage. So the laser is quite important to get right. The laser itself, this is perfectly positioned as you see right now. 1 player on either side of Milhouse, and the idea is when the laser itself goes off, you want to have the laser cross over the boss. It forms in an N or Z type shape, depending on how you look at it. And if the boss is inside that, he will be stunned. I don't believe he takes damage from it. It is just the stun. But it's important for one particular cast, which you'll see in a moment. Again, same thing. If you as a player are stood in that beam at all, once it erupts, like now, then you will... then you'll also be stunned, and you'll actually take quite a bit of damage from that as well. So the reason why you need it is this cast right here, the Diabolical Doom, as it's called. This cannot be interrupted by any means other than this stun. This is why it's important. If this cast goes off and starts to channel for a long time, it's a lot of group damage, which will kill you very quickly. It's pretty rough. So you want to make sure that you land that first laser stun and get that one sorted properly. After a certain amount of time, I don't know what the time is, I believe it's a minute.
It's after the Doom.
Yeah, it's immediately after the Doom. So once the Doomcast is interrupted or expires, then Milhouse jumps back up to the top and Maleficent comes down. And there's a few different abilities to go on with here. While he's upstairs, Milhouse will be channeling Frostbolts down onto the group. You can see that just based on the cast bar just here. You can see he's putting a Shadow Fury on right now, which I'll explain in a moment. But you can see the Frostbolts that he's spamming just on random members of the group. Maleficent's abilities are very, very deadly to the tank. The Buzzsaw that she does applies a stacking dot, which hits very, very hard. It hits really hard. I believe it now resets naturally. Is that right, fam? You don't need to stun anymore?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Definitely helps.
But it definitely helps, absolutely, because it puts a longer time in between each new stack or set of stacks of the Buzzsaw ability itself. Also, while this is going on, she will summon a experimental squirrel, which is a interactable bomb which will just head off towards the side of a room. The idea is you want to click that and get rid of it before the timer expires, which you can see on the top. You see Fem clicking it right now. Again, timer goes off, it explodes, does a pretty large amount of damage. While this fight's going on, you saw the Shadow Fury cast before, which we'll see in just a second. The Shadow Fury is exactly as you would expect it to be. It's a bit like the Warlock ability, but it's targeted on a player. It's indicated by a blue arrow on the player's head, which you can see right now, as well as a purple ring around them as well. The ring shows where people will be stunned if they stand, so it's pretty easy to be able to get away from that player. But much like the laser on the first phase of this fight, the stun also affects Maleficent. So what happens is, as you can see right now, the players will want to move towards the boss so that the ring is just overlapping the boss but not overlapping the tank, and that way you'll be able to stun Maleficent, give your tank a little bit of breathing space, make things a little bit easier. What it's really used for is this, the aerial robotic chicken, or the aerial rocket chicken, I should say. This is a bit like Diabolical Doom. It's effectively the same thing. It's just a lot of raid damage on a channel. So you can see what's happening here. The player with the... Go to it again a second. So the player with the Shadow Fury in question, once she starts this, will move towards Maleficent as she's about to start channeling the Rocket Chicken, so that it interrupts immediately. There will be 1 or 2 ticks of the AoE damage at max. It won't be enough to kill anyone as long as everyone's relatively healthy. And the boss itself is just rinse repeat after that. Yeah, there's not a whole lot else to the boss in particular. Once that, again, aerial rocket chicken gets interrupted, she goes back up, Milhouse comes back down, and both of the bosses are defeated at 10% HP. You don't kill them, they just surrender and run away. Once one boss goes down, the last one comes down again, and you want to be able to kill them off pretty quickly on the second round of their abilities. This is why Faithy mentioned before when you were fighting the slimes or the oils that you don't want to use any big cooldowns immediately. You want to save big cooldowns, or at least on the fight, you want to save big cooldowns for Maleficent. Purely because if you're killing, or if you're defeating Milhouse too early, he won't continue to use his abilities throughout the rest of the fight, which means you're going to have to face the aerial rocket chicken for almost its entire duration, which will almost definitely cause a wipe. So if you do get to this boss and you do have cooldowns ready, don't pop all your cooldowns on pull, unless it's something like Combustion or Recklessness, something very small that you will have going into the second phase. You just want to make sure that Milhouse doesn't get defeated immediately. That is very important, especially as you get up towards 15s and beyond if you're looking at pushing. So moving on from the Mana Storms, we go back into the main area. This dungeon is notorious for backtracking, which is why a lot of people don't like it, but it doesn't bother me in the slightest, which is why I do like it. And now we're coming up to the next pack, which is more of the same as the previous pack before going into the Mana Storms area and all around everywhere else in the room. More Death Speaker, more Cultists, another Bone Soldier, another Raptor. This time it's a little bit easier, because you have the urn in the corner, so you can see Fem gathering everything up, bringing it into the corner, have someone click on the urn, stun everything for 10 seconds, AoE it down and make sure that it all dies in plenty of good time. So nothing too tricky about this pack here. I wouldn't have said. It's more of the same. Make sure that the Death Speaker stays kicked, and just kill off the pack as quickly as possible. The Ardenweald area, which we will be getting to in just a moment. Faithy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. The Ardenweald zone is pretty much what most people like about the other side, probably, because it is the one place in the other side where you can pull big. And who doesn't like pulling big and seeing big numbers, right?
Me, I'm a Fury Warrior.
Yeah, but yeah. But yeah, basically, Ardenweald has a lot of mobs, but a lot of the mobs are pretty similar, and they are very, very easy to deal with. There's very few simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. But before we get into the Ardenweald zone, there's of course the gauntlet, right? Which is just dodge basic. So I think everyone knows this. I think everyone has died to this, except if you're tanking, you don't die to this. But it's basically more of a don't be greedy. Just wait it out. See them. Don't start walking before the effects has landed before you, unless you have a lot of movability, such as Night Fey Covenant or Dwarf Shadows, Leap, Blinks, etc., etc. Then do just wait it out. It is a stupid place to have deaths. So yeah, just play it safe. You have a lot of time. So the first few mobs that you have is Shimmer Moth, then you have Elder Horns and Stack Horns, and then you have the Stealth mobs, which is the Spriggans. And honestly, all of these mobs are super, super easy. The Shimmer Moth will give you a debuff that requires you to jump. If you get 10 stacks, you will sleep for a very, very long time, and that is not very ideal. You can dispel it, but it's easier to just jump and not fall asleep. Outside of that, you have the Spriggans, which has an interrupt, which is a shield that you can take. It is nice to take, but it's not something that is going to be having a big effect on you if your group doesn't interrupt it. Lastly, you have a few birds in this zone. You have the Hatchling, which is probably the most annoying mobs in all of Ardenweald and the scariest one, but at the same time, also one of the easiest. What it does is that it will almost immediately start channeling a cast. As if it finishes, it will pull every single mob in its area, and that's a lot of mobs. It will pull pretty much like half of Ardenweald onto you, and it almost certainly is a wipe. So you prefer dodging all of the hatchlings. You don't want any hatchlings. You're gonna get one hatchling later on, but what you'll do is that you'll just CC it and deal with it, as it has very, very low HP, as mentioned, which is why it's super easy. Very, very low HP, but you cannot let the cast go through, or you basically doomed. Secondly, you have the Blade Beaks, which is the more normal birds in the zone. What they do is that they have an ability on the tank called, what's it called, Fem? Something with beak? Which is
it's something beaky.
Yeah, so which is basically a stacking buff that every time they do it, it'll do more and more damage. And obviously, normally you do pull quite a lot of beaks at the same time, as Ardenweald in general is pretty easy to deal with. The mobs doesn't have a lot of HP and does hit them very hard. However, as a tank, you gotta respect it when the stacks go high. It does do a lot of damage, and it can be very, very fatal if you go very, very high in stacks. So do remember to pull with moderation, pull so you won't get an immense amount of stacks if your group doesn't have cooldowns, etc., etc. But outside of that, the Ardenweald zone is pretty easy. There is a mini boss, which is a matriarch, a dragon, which has some annoying abilities, but you primarily just try to dodge it, as it's not really worth the count and the time, as it has a lot of HP and it hurts and has some annoying mechanics. So primarily you will just deal with stags, birds, and Spriggan. That is on Shimmer Moth. And in Ardenweald, you also have an urn, which can be very, very good, especially in Ardenweald, because you do have a lot of mobs in Ardenweald. So as you can see, we talked about the Blade Beaks. Fem is getting a lot of Blade Beaks over, and a stealth Spriggan pack over to this urn, which is hiding behind this pillar. And what it'll do is that we'll stack all of it, and you'll just burst it down in very big damage. It is important, as mentioned, with these Blade Beaks, that you do have damage to deal with them quickly, or it'll be too deadly for the tank to handle. So if you do big pulls with birds, make sure that they die, or your tank is gonna take a lot of damage. Outside of that, I'm not too sure what to say about the Ardenweald zone. It's pretty chill. Like, it is probably the easiest of all the zones. There's not a lot of mechanics going on. There's a lot of mobs, but all of the mobs are pretty easy. They're pretty straightforward. You do pull pretty big in Ardenweald. It's infamous for that. It's one of the places in Shadowlands where you can pull very, very big, which is obviously nice for a lot of people. A lot of people like seeing a lot of mobs. Reminds you of Legion, where we could pull pretty much the entire dungeon. So as you can see here, you have like a short pull, and next is the one hatchling that I talked about. And the hatchling is a mob that's very, very important to get interrupted as it's cast. It is primarily just because of the big bird, which is called a matriarch, which has some nasty abilities, has a lot of HP, and hits very, very hard. So you just want to not get that pull. That is the whole idea of not pulling small birds. And that's why you stop them and CC them, etc., while you go through this area. Well, you only do pull one, but yeah, want to stop that one.
Yep, we'll see that in just a moment. I believe it's Fem even that actually CCs it, but the moment it gets even remotely close to melee range, you can see the cast going off. And just a quick fear, they have no HP. They have absolutely no HP, so they will be destroyed very quickly, but you will probably need to CC them at least once with some kind of stun, fear, anything like that will work. Just anything to stop it from getting out the cry and pulling even more birds on top of you, which can cause quite a few issues. Something that we will see as part of this route specifically is once all the mobs have been dealt with on this path right here, is that there are 3 sneaky stealth mobs just off down to the left a little bit further down the path. We'll see those in just a second. So routes can go one of 2 ways. Either you can have a route that will proc Pride with this in mind, or you can have a route that will obviously proc it not with it in mind. These 3 little mobs right here. If you are on a route where you're not going to be playing these on purpose, whole idea would be try not to stand even remotely close to this little archway here, as the aggro radius on these 3 is actually quite big. They might spawn, or they might stand like around here, a little bit further down the path, but you can pull them by standing even remotely close to that archway. I've seen it happen multiple times, and while they're not the most annoying mobs in the world to deal with, and they are pretty easy, it's just completely unnecessary. It's just a big waste of time, more or less. There's absolutely no need that you would have to play those if you can avoid it. So unless they are, planned in the route itself, so that's fine. These 3 mobs will get killed off, we'll have the Pride, and then we'll move on to Dealer Hexer. Another pretty tricky boss, in all honesty, but Fem, do you want to quickly run us through just a few of the abilities on the next boss?
Sure. It has, I think, 4 mechanics. All of them revolve around, well, not all of them actually, but most of them revolve around the Y-axis, aka going up in the air. She drops these traps that once you enter them will knock you high up in the air, and you basically use those traps to counter the other mechanics in the fight. That's the traps dropping now. The first thing you're gonna see is a bomb on one player. The way to deal with that is that when it detonates, you can see the big timer. When it detonates, you need to not be on the same y-axis as the others, because it puts a nasty debuff on the people that are on the same level as the bomb person. So basically, by going up in the air, you make sure the debuff only goes on the bomb player. And then you also see the big cast there, Explosive Contrivance, which is basically the bomb but reversed. It's like the boss has the bomb, basically. Everyone needs to go up in the air to counter that. Unless you're a warrior, you can reflect it. Then you have the most important mechanic, which is the Arc Lightning. As you can see on the screen right now, I have 12 debuffs of something. That's the Arc Lightning. It bounces. It's a 8-second dot on one player that the boss puts out. And once it expires, it jumps to the nearest target. So basically, the reason most people wipe on this boss is because they let the Arc Lightning bounce between 2 people, and then those 2 people die. The way to deal with it is basically to take a few stacks. Like you can take it as a tank, up to like, I don't know, 16 stacks probably. And then, but you wanna like hand it over to different people. Like you take one with the rogue, then you give it to the mage, and then it comes back to melee. If you rotate it between 3 people, you will take as little damage as possible from the mechanic. So that's the ideal way of dealing with it.
And you may have mentioned already, and I missed it, but the stacks themselves, it is a general arcane damage taken increase, which means that if you end up getting the bomb with a lot of stacks, it's going to hit incredibly hard, because you still take the damage from the bomb when it's on you, even if you're up in the air and no one else is taking it. Something else that I want to mention really quickly, I'll just wind that back just a second, is there is a way for range players to be able to effectively cheese this fight, in a sense. You can see the drained soul from the warlock just coming off to the side here, and you'll see it's going up basically onto the ledge where the groups just jumped down from to actually engage the boss. A range player can stand up there, and because, as Fem mentioned, all of the boss's abilities operate on a y-axis, or a y-x-axis type deal. If the warlock or if a range player is stood up there, they never have to move from any of these abilities. The bombs will never hit them, as they are high enough in the air that they just won't take the ability. That could be fixed at some point in the future, and I think might well be, but as of right now in 9.0.5, that still works. So you can stand there and chill as much as you want. It's probably best to not have two range stood up there, because then there's more likelihood that one of you gets the bomb and you end up having to move anyway. The idea is you want the range to be able to move as little as possible so they can pump out as much damage as possible, because the boss is very tricky, with having to dodge all of the traps on the ground, deal with the bombs appropriately, get the stacks bouncing properly. It is a very tricky boss, and you want to try and keep everything as simple as possible for as many people as possible. You can see here as the warlocks jump down, he's got the bomb on him right now, as you can see there, but he'll quickly just warlock teleport back up to the top, and it keeps everyone safe. He doesn't have to take a trap to go up in the air. He jumped down specifically because he was losing HP and wanted to be healed at the... I believe the healer was stood just slightly out of range for him there. But yeah, again, the boss itself, fairly tricky, but this is why you want to try and have pride. And you can see that the group used Bloodlust on this as well. It is a far better place to use Bloodlust than the last boss. The last boss doesn't particularly need it by any means. So you want to make this boss as easy as possible. Once the boss goes down, to get back to the start, you want to click on the green portal. You used to be able to click on the green portal immediately once the boss died, and it would take you all the way back to the beginning, or the beginning of the Ardenweald area. No longer the case in 9.05. It just takes you to the top of the ledge, because fun was detected. But what you can do is, while the forced roleplay is going on and you're channeling the mojo or whatever somebody has you doing, you can actually use your mount while you're in that animation, and you will get on your mount while in the animation, which just means it speeds things up a tiny bit. Once you land at the very beginning of the Ardenweald area, you're still mounted, and you'll just run straight through the door with it a little bit faster. It's the smallest of time saves and mostly pointless, but you might as well do it if you can. It does make sense. And now we're moving on to Mueh'zala, and for the last boss, Faithy, do you want to take us through how the portals work specifically?
Sure, will do. Okay, so first of all, you have 4 portals in this room when he goes into second phase. Can you quickly paint them?
Yep.
Sir. So you have a front left, back left, a front right, and a back right. What you have to do is that you have to split up your group to get one person in each portal, as to where you'll have to deal with the NAD and click a totem before a set amount of time, in a set amount of time, or you will have to suffer the consequences, that being that you will not buff Born Zombie, who will take a lot of damage into Mueh'zala. So how you usually do this is that you'll have a tank and a healer together, and a DPS in each portal. These mobs actually have quite a lot of HP, especially in higher keys, so the normal thing to do is to save cooldowns for them, as your damage into Mueh'zala yourself isn't as important as getting this mechanic done properly. So what you'll have to do is that you split up your group and you have one on each side, right? And what you can do, however, is that if you're a class with a 1 minute cooldown, you can use it on pull, as the first portal was spawned 1 minute into the fight. If you take said portal, it will teleport you depending on what portal you take. So if you take the back right, for example, it will teleport you to the closest on the right. If you take the front right, it will teleport you to the furthest on the right. And just like on the other side, if you take the back left, it will teleport you to the closest on the left. And if you take the front left, you'll be teleported to the furthest on the left. And this is always the case. No matter where the boss will be, if you'll get more phases, then depending on where the last mob will be, you will know where to be able to teleport. If you just remember where each portal will teleport you, right?
What's important to note about that is that if you do fail the damage check, which you will see in this poll, in fact, we'll continue it just so we can obviously look through the rest of the fight itself. But if you do fail the damage check, the chances are you will end up on a different platform with Mueh'zala. He will take you not necessarily to this platform that you start on, he'll take you to a different one. But where the portals spawn will always correlate to exactly what Faithy said in terms of how you look at the room. It will never be a case of just because the one at the back left here takes you immediately left, that doesn't mean that the back left one is going to take you to that same platform. The back left one will always take you to the closest one to the left. The front left will take you always to the furthest one on the left, and so on. So it's pretty easy to identify if you do fail the mechanic and you can see which totem is still active around the room. You can identify quickly which portal it is that your group needs to go into to be able to complete the fight. That will never change. That will never change. Fem checking to see if Spell Reflect does damage on the Soul Crusher. It does not. I could have told him that, but I must have been asleep.
You were not in the run.
I was not in the run. And you would have tested it and looked for yourself anyway, let's face it.
Yeah.
Nothing like some personal testing.
Alright.
So we'll quickly cover the abilities of Mueh'zala. His own abilities are pretty straightforward. I'll wind it back just a touch so we can see all of them in full. He has Cosmic Artifice, which he's throwing out right now. It just puts 4 debuffs on the group. It will never be on the tank unless either a DPS or a healer is dead, at which point then it will target the tank. It is dispellable, but it doesn't do that much damage. Once it wears off or is dispelled, it puts a zone on the floor, which you can see at the bottom of the screen right here. I'll just highlight that real quick. These ones here. As you can tell, it's the same as anything else that's on the floor. Usually it's bad, so we don't stand in it. The other ability that Mueh'zala has is Master of Death, which is what he's channeling right now. It's basically known as the combo mechanic. He will have 3 particular strikes that he can do. He will either use his left hand, his right hand, or the melee strike, which he's just done there. It's not the easiest thing in the world to see if you are in melee, but it can be identified 2 different ways. So you can base it on how he moves his hands. So for example here, he's moved what would be his right hand back, and he is glowing slightly red. You can just see that on his outline just around here. He's glowing slightly red, which means red for right. He's going to be throwing his frontal down the right side, or the left side for you. So it's easy enough to avoid. Same with the next one. He's lifted his left hand up, so it's going to be on your right. Which hand he moves correlates to what side it's going to be on. That's the easiest way to say it. So again, everyone moves to the side. You can see the big beam goes down the front. Or down the right side, sorry. And then you've got the big melee slam, which you can just run out of. It's not that difficult to avoid. The melee slam can also be reflected, by the way. And then we have the cast of Shatter Reality. If anyone is still on that platform at the point that Mueh'zala finishes Shatter Reality, they die. Nothing will save them. They will be one-shot through immunities, they will be one-shot through anything. It does not matter. You cannot survive that. It is designed to insta-kill. Everyone now has to split off to go for the visages, or the ads that he spawns around all 4 corners of the room. This is why the portals are important. So again, it's usually pre-assigned who's going to what portal. You just have to kill your visage, and then click the totem, which you will see at the front of the platform itself. Unfortunately, we do see that Fem and his healer are unable to click the totem in time, so that's something that's important to note as well. Killing the visage is not enough. You must click the totem as well. Once all 4 totems are clicked, 25, I believe it's 20, was it 20% per totem? Is that right, Fem?
Yeah.
20% per totem of damage into Mueh'zala. Obviously, the boss is defeated at just below 10% HP. So you do need to do 10% damage to the boss on your own as well. But you can take care of that in the final phase once you've obviously just gotten rid of all of the totems there. Once you get onto the next platform... Oh, something else to mention. For each totem that you click in one phase... One Samdi will also give you a pretty sizable stacking haste buff as well, just to help you nuke down Mueh'zala a little bit more. But again, so unfortunately, Fem and his healer failed, which means you have to go through another phase like this. If you do manage to finish all 4 totems within one phase, then he will not send you back to the platforms again. He just won't do it. There's nothing for him to send you to. Effectively, all of the ads are dead and finished with. But yeah, we'll see that he will cast the Shatter Reality once again. The entire group will go, finish off the final ad, and the boss will be defeated. And that pretty much covers it for the other side. Again, my favorite dungeon in this game at the moment. And these two probably think that I'm stupid for it, but I don't care. Is there anything you two want to add onto the other side at all?
No, I would say the other side is a dungeon that is somewhat pretty straightforward. It has some difficult bosses and it has difficult mobs, but they don't have a lot of mechanics. They're just hard-hitting and have a lot of HP.
Sure.
It is a dungeon where having a full wipe could be potentially very scary, but if you just go through the dungeon slowly, pulling like reasonably, then you will time it.
Sure.
You do have quite a lot of time in the other side.
Yeah, it's not too bad, especially since the timer was buffed by an extra 2 minutes recently. That's actually turned the timer into quite tight to pretty decent, honestly. I think it's perfectly reasonable now at 43 minutes. It might seem like a long time, but I think that was mostly done for it was just done to help out. 41 minutes was very tight in some cases, especially if you had something go wrong. It was a bit rough. It was a bit rough, but no, certainly a very, very manageable dungeon now. Just need to have your wits about you in most cases.